Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 764. I'm Tom Kegley, your host. Today we feature my conversation with Johanna Rothman. We discussed her new book, Successful Independent Consulting. Well, we started there, then hit topics like personal value and the impact of success. This might be the 11th conversation I've had with Johanna, and each time I look forward to our time together with anticipation. They are always like attending a masterclass. Remember, buy a copy of Successful Independent Consulting. It's available everywhere, but also there are some links in the show notes. Johanna's bio. Johanna Rothman, known as the Pragmatic Manager, offers frank advice for your thorny problems. She helps leaders and teams learn to see simple, reasonable options that might work. Those practical alternatives can help them be more effective with others at work. With those choices, they can choose what and how to adapt their product development. With her trademark practicality and humor, Johanna is the author of 19 books, hundreds of articles and blog posts about many aspects of product development. Her most recent books include Successful Independent Consulting, Free Your Inner Nonfiction Writer, and the Modern Management Made Easy series. You can find her newsletter and blogs at jrothman.com and createadaptablelife.com. Links in the show notes. Editor's note, if you're not subscribed to Johanna's monthly newsletter, well, you just ought to be. Johanna Rothman, welcome back to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you so much, Tom. I am delighted to be here.
I am really excited. And today we're going to actually, take sort of a macro view of, the 17 years I've been at this in terms of the cast and talk about your new book, Successful Independent Consulting, which, it's near and dear to my heart. I'm about 3/4 of the way through the book, so I haven't read the whole thing, I will admit, but I am roaring through at least a chapter a day. And unfortunately, I'm ending up taking a ton of notes, and I thought I knew a lot of this stuff. So let's actually start with, there are a ton of consultants, and they call themselves all sorts of things. I think the most common name might be agile coaches, but there are a plethora of them, so to speak. I'm going to guess most of them fail at being independent consultants.
My experience is that most of them do, and that's because they have not differentiated themselves from everybody else, especially in the form of agile coaches, especially everybody who calls themselves an agile coach. I mean, how differentiating can you be if you use a title that almost 100,000 people on LinkedIn have?
Excellent. I always wanted to be one of 100,000. That's quite the cohort.
Yeah. Now I call myself a management consultant, and there are plenty of those. However, I talk about my expertise in my headline. I talk about my expertise on my website. So it says expertise in managing product development. And that's how I differentiate myself.
I think part of the fact that there are all these undifferentiated consultants on LinkedIn, and there might be all sorts of business reasons why they're now throwing out their shingles. But I think part of it is that they really have not been able to focus on what their value is. The book obviously delves into that in a fairly deep manner, but how do people discover the value that they can deliver?
So I like to think about taking my most recent few engagements as a consultant, or if I'm starting out, the last couple things I did in my job, and I said, how did I make a difference? Did I facilitate collaboration and Sometimes I did, but more often when I was back inside the organization, I started off as a consultant from a middle management job. And that's where I said, I helped people figure out how to manage their projects. I helped my managers figure out how to manage the project portfolio. So I focused on the flow of work through the system. Not everybody does that. In fact, most people don't think about it like that, but that's how I thought about it. And that when you think about your most recent couple of jobs or engagements and you try and put numbers on them, how much money did we save? How much revenue did we gain? How was the morale for the people in the organization? So you start thinking about the tangible and the intangible, and then the peripheral benefits. And if you start to think like that, now you understand your value.
Having been a hiring manager and spending a lot of time mentoring people who are hiring managers, one of the things that I hear over and over is people falling prey to sort of a bias that they did all of this. It's them that made this happen. Or worse yet, that they can do anything. A little bit of the Dunning-Kruger stuff. As someone who's been at this for a while and now has written a book on the topic, how can you help somebody actually pierce that you can't be everything to everybody kind of scenario?
So that's where I really like to ask people, how can you narrow down your focus so you can say, in this context, I work with these kinds of people to solve these kinds of problems. And if you really narrow down the context and the ideal buyer, if not the ideal customer, right? Those might be different people. And then the things that you do for them, that will really help you narrow your focus. So when I started my consulting business, I had kind of two focuses because I was really trying to figure out where I should eventually focus. And that was in the testing arena, because I was one of the few people I knew who had a strategic approach to testing. It was all about the project and the product, not necessarily what the team could do. Because if we could figure out the risks in the project and the product, then we could figure out how to do the testing. Because we could never do everything, right? That was certainly a theme of mine back in the 90s when I started.
People still think they can test everything.
Yeah, just not possible. I used a system test approach that was strategic, and I nudged the developers to do more unit and feature and integration testing. And I talked about the measurements we wanted. And it wasn't until one of my clients said to me, "You're really talking about project management." And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Back when I was inside the organization, I taught a project management workshop because the project managers I worked with were very big on Gantt charts and not very big on facilitating teams. So that's when I said, I wonder if I am kind of done, in quotes, with the system test part of my career. And now I need to move on to the project management part of my career. And so people who knew me from 94 to 97 still think of me as a test consultant. And the people who have known me since about 97 say, "You did something in test?" Yeah.
I'd like to get your opinion. This is something I've run into relatively recently, and that is a brand of consultants that believe that they are being brought into an organization or have sold themselves into an organization to fix the client or to fix the individual. I think that's an abject failure of empathy, but I'd like to hear somebody else's opinion on it. Sometimes I think I'm, just out in the woods on this.
No, I totally agree with you. I have had several opportunities just in the past couple of years to coach a client on how they appear to other people. And inevitably, it's the manager of often a senior leader who wants me to fix a middle manager. And so I have declined all of those engagements as they appear. And I have suggested instead, I am happy to be your trusted advisor or your coach about how you can approach this with your employee. Because if one person has this problem, it's almost always a failure of the hiring process or what you reward. This is a cultural issue. I am happy to work with you. We can construct a coaching engagement, a consulting engagement, a trusted advisor engagement, because once you start to see this and see how to fix it, you're going to realize you need me for more things, not just this one little signal of a problem in the organization. And I have to say, of the 6 senior leaders who have asked me to fix other people, 5 of them have declined. And either the troublesome, and put that in quotes, person or the senior leader left. And in one organization, I've been working as a trusted advisor with a senior leader, and he is saving his company so much money. Their throughput is so high. He has changed how they hire. I mean, the results are amazing. I wish I was not under a non-disclosure agreement.
Well, maybe someday, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you can write a case study on it. Probably by then the non-disclosures will have expired. Perhaps. You point out something that I think is hard for many new consultants to actually think about. And that is that they're brought in. It might be the perfect opportunity, but it's a transaction. And doesn't mean they'll be there forever. They have to be able to actually look at what's going on and find a way of, helping an organization grow, or they're going to have to find something else to fill that transaction void. How do you approach, or in the book, how would you suggest approaching the idea of making yourself valuable, growing an organization, but also not just milking them?
So this is why I really like to focus on the relationships and the boundaries of the engagement. This is a lot more difficult for internal change artists and internal consultants because they're looking for ongoing work. But let's talk about the external consultant and the external change artist. I really like to focus on what does the client need me to do now? And after they have succeeded with me and I leave them, I check in with them a little bit later because we have a relationship, right? I stay in touch with them. I ask them to subscribe to my newsletter because we have a relationship. I also ask for referrals. I'm not as good at asking for referrals as I should be, as most of us are not, but I'm still working on this. But I find that the more I treat my clients as humans with human desires and human needs, the more likely they are to treat me that way.
That's good advice. It's funny, you talk about referrals, and I think that, again, if you run into a new consultant, and obviously I think those who've been at it for a while have learned to get over this, is that whole, I have to be a salesperson And perhaps they have in their mind, well, I didn't go to college. I didn't get a master's. I didn't get a blah, blah, blah to wear a plaid sports coat and sell used cars. I mean, it's just wrong feeling. Are independent consultants salespeople?
Well, we are, and we can do it with content marketing. So I have decades of content that's on my blog, that's in my books. I'm now finally doing something with my YouTube channel. You have decades of podcasts, decades of content. If people know anything about what they're looking for, they can find us, and they will not use the same search terms for both you and for me. Our content marketing sets us apart from everybody else. And I would do almost anything other than cold calling. I do not want to cold call anybody at all. I was going to say I would take off a body part, but probably not. I would probably leave all my body parts. But I don't want to cold network. I don't want to cold call. I don't want to be a used car salesman. I want to point to content that makes a difference for people who are looking for somebody like me. And that's how I use my content.
But if you publish all that content, I've gotten into this argument with bosses back in the day when I had a boss, even while I was consulting. It's like if you put it all out there, they'll just take it and they'll never have to talk to you again.
So I often take series of blog posts and make a book out of them. That's what happened to Free Your Inner Nonfiction Writer and create a conference proposal. And people don't do that. It's not in a form that other people can use. People really need, and even if you publish everything in a book, I mean, I put everything I know about consulting into this book. I had planned to have a workbook, but that's mostly all the now do this at the end of every chapter. Right? And I run cohorts based on this book. And without my support, intervention, suggestions, dare I say, consulting and coaching, people still have problems with this. I mean, I wrote the portfolio book, Manager Project Portfolio and Agile and Lean Program Management. I still have workshops based on those books. Everything is in the book. People don't need to call me, but they call me because, while everything is out there, they still have trouble implementing. So consultants support implementation of changes. And the clients who really want to change will not just buy your book, will not just read your blog posts and articles. They will actually hire you. And all of the content supports their reasoning for why they would hire you.
But everybody who's trying to implement something, their context is different. So having that consulting conversation about how to take something that might be a good practice and mold it to context, I think that's, well, again, you have seen many things. And part of the value of seeing and doing many things is the ability to translate those context pieces. People within an organization, they may have been at 2 or 3 organizations. They may have only been at 1. They know they have a smaller world. And part of the value of a good consultant is to broaden their horizons, broaden their world. So you have all this stuff. You are, and I was thinking through this morning, and I created a list. You're a consultant, you're an author, you're a blogger, you're a speaker, you're a salesperson, you're a marketer, you're an administrator, because you probably sign your own checks, which is,
Yeah.
later in the book. I had just gotten to that section. So, and you probably don't spend, you probably spend at least a half an hour away from your screen once a day to do things that are outside, right? When I have that kind of a conversation, and that's why I thought the book was so good, is that I'd like to take a physical copy and beat some people on the head that say, oh, I want to be a consultant. Well, you got to be a lot of things. How do you actually balance that and have a real life and actually be healthy on top of all that stuff?
Systems. I believe I quote James Clear and say something like, we succeed or fail to the level of our systems. And you and I joked before we started to record that my books look pretty good right now. I showed you my bookshelves that are still there. There are still things that need to be filed, but my hard drive is totally organized. My day is totally organized, and it's not that I blog from 9:30 to 10. No, I have, when I need to set aside time for writing, I do schedule time. But I always work I use personal Kanban. I work in small chunks of anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes to maybe an hour at a time. And I right size my work. I mean, I look like a lean project team, although I'm just one person. So I have a system for everything.
So you wave a magic wand and people are successful and they become this successful independent consultant. Success can breed sort of a myopic view of the world. And you might fall into the trap of, hey, I like doing Scrum, and Scrum is the only answer in the world. Or Kanban is the only, which may be closer to true. I'm sorry. So your world gets narrowed. How can an independent consultant keep their avenues and their horizons broad such that they don't end up painting themselves into a corner? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I, once upon a time, coded Fortran and COBOL and that stuff. There might be some people that still do that, but if I had not reinvented myself, if you hadn't reinvented yourself, if you hadn't continued to learn, we wouldn't be having this conversation. How do people do that?
Yeah, you said the magic word, which is learning. And so I have several approaches to my continuous learning. One is I read a lot. I happen to have a little problem and I buy books. You could read them from the library. It's totally fine. However, I find that the more I want to read books that are just adjacent to my expertise, the more I learn and the more I want to go back to them later on. So as part of my personal essay writing, I write a question of the week every week on my Create an Adaptable Life blog. That means I've been reading about resilience. I've been learning about the value of asking questions and the kinds of questions. You might not think that resilience as a topic would be applicable to my work, but is totally applicable not just to how I work, but to how my clients need to work. And there are so many of them are not thinking about resilience as a way to manage the organization. Now, do I have the words that I need to say around this? No, not yet, but that's fine. And now, so but I can bat those ideas around with my learning cohort. So in the book, I talk about how when Jerry Weinberg and Esther Derby and Don Gray and I ran the AYE conference for so long, we got together at least a couple times a year outside of the conference. And that meant we had a learning cohort. We actively learned how to write a conference description. how to design and deliver experiential learning. I mean, we learned together. Did Jerry lead us? Yes, of course he led us. However, there were several times when one of us said something and he said, say that again, and he wrote it down. So the more we learn and the more we integrate our learning with our work, the more we can adapt our businesses. So just as I have adapted my business over the years, and you have adapted your business over the years, right? That's why I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend all independent consultants adapt their business. So for those people who are all into Scrum or all into Lean, what is the value of the quote other sign? And is there something that integrates both of them? What is the context, as you said before? What is the right context to recommend one or the other or both? And until every single consultant, especially in the Agile community, asks themselves that question, we will still have terrible Scrum and terrible Kanban and terrible retrospectives. And I don't want that anymore. I really want people to think about the context and what do they need to learn to make it better for their clients so their clients succeed.
Speaking of an adjacent topic, and I think it was, might have been chapter 2, chapter 3, but it's something that I'm reading and writing about right now, and that is critical thinking. How do you define critical thinking?
So when I try and define critical thinking, it's how many ways can I approach the signals of this problem to visualize the problem with or for my clients so we can then solve the problem and probably by generating multiple options. So it's a whole bunch of stuff. But first, to recognize we almost always just see the signals. We don't often see the problem. And then how do I share what I see? How do I share my insights with my clients?
How important is developing, learning, getting better at critical thinking for an independent consultant?
If I had to rank the kind of 1 or 2 or 3 most important skills, empathy with the client has to be first, right? We cannot blame people for what they want, but then ways to understand the situation and then solve or help change the client in some way, help them change their context so they have a different, better problem to solve. I think that's got to be next.
Johanna, this has been just super. It always is, and I highly enjoy it. And I highly recommend that people pick up a copy. It's on LeanPub. Is it on Amazon too?
Oh, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
I don't have an audio version yet, but it's in ebook everywhere, paper everywhere, hardcover everywhere. I need to look and see if Amazon actually shows the hardcover. They have changed all their stuff. So yeah.
Well, when you're the 800-pound behemoth, you do what you do. Audiobook? Is this actually something in the works?
I have a dislike-hate relationship with Audible. For every book that I price at $19.99, well, first of all, they decide what to price it at. And secondly, I get about $1.50 in royalties.
Oh, good time.
My Modern Management Made Easy books are totally in audio, and I'm not sure if I will ever put them on Amazon because I'm not sure I can afford it. This book is big enough. It's almost 300 pages. Yeah, I know, but I think it's a good read. So I think that I will probably do an audiobook for this, but I'm not kind of in any rush. Although I realize that the publisher in me says The people who read in audio are different than the people who read ebooks, who are different from the people who read in hardcover. So, yeah. I don't know.
It's that feedback loop, right? It's the people who are coming to, your conference presentations, the people that are reading your blog, the people that are reading your book, all are different. And you can use that in that feedback cycle, which again is in the book. See, I did read it, or at least most of it so far. Yeah. If you woke up tomorrow morning and someone gave you your caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand and said that you could fix any two problems that affect the world of independent consulting, what would those two things be? And
the first thing would be to never, ever, ever quote an hourly rate. Ever, 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 never, 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 never. Always have a project rate or a value-based rate. Because when consultants quote hourly rates, they put themselves in a position where the client wants one thing and the consultant wants the exact opposite thing. So never, ever, 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 ever work as an hourly rate. And I guess the second thing is that even if you don't want to have what you might call, or what some of my readers have called a quote real business, well, I happen to incorporate. I mean, I think that that's just the cost of doing business in a world like this. Even if you always want to work for somebody who will place you and a client, start building your content. What makes you different? Because even if you always want to work through an agency, the more you write and speak about what makes you different, the more you will get, the better prices you will command, right? Even if that's an hourly rate, which makes me nuts. But the more content people start to create in any form, the more they learn what they really think. I do this in writing. I suspect that you do this in writing also. The more I write, the more I learn what I really think and what I actually know. And so just imagine how much more useful you could be as that undifferentiated agile coach if you actually differentiated yourself and said, here's how I work. Here are the things I bring that are valuable to my clients. Yeah.
I can't argue that. I was half wondering if you'd say a simplified tax code, so I would have to track less stuff but I've been in the independent consulting business long enough that, it is part, well, and I think you're right in terms of, looking at yourself as a business, maybe even incorporating, even if you're going to work through another organization, because sooner or later it's a mess if you don't.
Yeah. I mean, separating personal money from work money, you have to do it. So, yeah.
And keep that clean and never penetrate the veil in case right. The balloon goes up. Johanna, again, fantastic. How would people continue the conversation? How would they find out about your brand?
So everything is on jrothman.com, JROTHMAN.com, because back when I started my business and I got my website in 95, I only needed my first initial and my last name to differentiate myself. So everything is there. And I have a list of all the books I published, my blog, all that stuff is all there.
Fantastic. As you know, at this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you like. Obviously, we want people to go out and buy the book, but is there anything else that you'd like to promote?
So I hope that people also look at either Free Your Inner Nonfiction Writer, the book, or the workshop. I am not going to offer a summer version of the workshop. I decided I'm taking the summer off from running cohort-based classes. Yeah, I want my summer, but I expect to start another cohort in the fall again. And if you are serious about a consulting career, right, not something you do in between being a regular employee of somebody else, which is honorable work, right? All work that somebody pays you for is honorable. But if you're serious about differentiating well, that doesn't really have integrity the way I think about it. Yeah. But if they pay you for it, it's probably honorable. But I really hope that people look at Free Inner Nonfiction Writer and really think about signing up for the workshop, because it's 6 weeks of your time, 15 minutes a day, and that will change how you think about writing and what you do for writing. It makes everything in consulting so much more easy.
Super. I'll have a link to that stuff in the show notes also. Fantastic. Johanna, this is marvelous, and I'm glad to have you on the podcast in year 17.
I always love talking with you, Tom. Thank you so much.
In Reread Saturday News, simple is the first principle of making something sticky. It's also the title of Chapter 1 of Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. There are 3 areas in the chapter I would like to spend more time with. The formula, simple equals core plus compactness, the curse of knowledge, metaphors and analogies. As you read the chapter, you'll see that all 3 are intertwined. However, each of the 3 is useful to consider in isolation. Links in the show notes to this week's installment of Reread Saturday, and links in the show notes to buy a copy of the book. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast, number 765, we will continue our summer theme on critical thinking by exploring how experts' experience and evidence apply to critical thinking. We'll also have a visit from the one and only Susan Parente, who brings her Not a Scrumdimentalist column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?